Hello everybody, this is the Sports Ball Network with another video. I apologize for the lull in NBA content on this channel like I said last video, but if you have still stuck around, it is very much appreciated. Well, let me stop yapping and let's get to the content so I don't actually lose the people who are here. As we enter the NBA playoffs, most NBA fans know that Luka Doncic led the NBA in scoring with an average of 33.9 points per game. Halliburton led the league in assists, and Domantas Sabonis led the league in rebounds per game. But what about some more obscure stat leaders? Stats you either didn't know or didn't care about? Which player got blocked the most per game? Which players are the best and worst isolation scorers in terms of points per possession? Which player runs the most miles per game? All that useless info and more coming up right now. One more thing though, actually, to be eligible to lead the league in a stat category, you have to play a certain number of games. I know the all NBA teams require a 65 game minimum, so I'm going to use that for my obscure stats as well. We're going to start with a less obscure statistic, and then we'll eventually get to more and more obscure stat categories. The first one we're going to talk about is the assist to turnover ratio. Shockingly, for a decent stretch of the season, Kessler Edwards was on the brink of playing enough games to qualify. At one point, he led the league with a 9-to-1 assist to turnover ratio, and I mean that literally. He had 9 assists and 1 turnover on the season. However, because of the games played minimum, the actual leader is the king of the assist to turnover ratio, Tyus Jones. Even rotting away in Washington, Tyus Jones had a 7.35 assist to turnover ratio this season. Monte Morris and Delon Wright did have better ratios than Tyus Jones, but neither played the game's minimum to qualify. Next, let's go to second chance points. In my opinion, a significantly undervalued stat in basketball. Usually the big guys working down low, getting offensive rebounds and putbacks are leading this category, and that is true when it comes to the leader this season, Anthony Davis. He's averaging 4.5 second chance points per game. Interestingly, Saddiq Bey, who barely missed the games played minimum because of his season-ending injury, he played 63 games, but he was the only wing player in the top 25 of this stat, which is a little odd because he's not really grabbing offensive rebounds, but I guess Clint Capella and Onyeka Okongwu were getting a lot of offensive rebounds and kicking it out to him as a shooter. 2-for-1 special coming at you guys next, 2 different stat categories led by the same player. The Greek Freak in the sheets is the leader in both points in the paint and fast break points this season with 20.3 and 5.5 respectively. And that should not be a surprise to anyone. That is Giannis's bread and butter, running and finishing in transition and dominating in the paint. You can even throw in the fact that he draws the most personal fouls per game at 8.3. I do have to give a shout out to 39-year-old LeBron James, who was second place in the entire league in fast break points per game, truly just continuing to spit at the feet of Father Time. For the first negative stat category, one you really don't want to be leading in, let's talk about the player who had been blocked the most times per game this season, and that is Jaren Jackson Jr. of the Memphis Grizzlies. The Grizzlies have been absolutely ravaged, like completely raw dogged by injuries this year, meaning Jaren Jackson Jr. had to be the primary option with a bunch of G-Leaguers this season. He's not the strongest guy inside, and he had to create a lot of opportunities for himself, which is also not his strong suit, resulting in a lot of tough shots. Hence, he was blocked 1.8 times per game on average. Shout out to him for playing 66 games, barely qualifying for this honor that you don't really want to have. This next stat shows just how badly the Grizzlies were devastated by injuries this season. The Memphis Grizzlies had 23 players start a game for them this season. That is more than the total roster space for an NBA team. And even so, 16 of those players started over 10 games for the Grizzlies, which is just a crazy showing of their roster turnover. The Charlotte Hornets are second place, or second to last place, however you want to spin it, starting 19 players this season, and then there were a bunch of other teams who started 18 players. Amazingly, on the other side of the coin, the Sacramento Kings only started 8 players this season, which is really a testament to their health, and they did not make any other major roster moves, which is also a reason why they only started 8 players. Another cool stat about starting lineups, the Oklahoma City Thunder were the only team in the league to have 5 players start 70 plus games this season. They were truly just healthy the entire season. This next stat is one whose leader really made no sense about a month ago, but by season's end, the leader was the guy you'd expect, or one of the guys you'd expect. In mid-March, if I were to ask you who led the NBA in defensive win shares, who would your first few guesses be? Probably Rudy Gobert, OG Anunoby, Anthony Davis, etc. Well, it was actually Donovan Mitchell, who's an average defender at best. Now, to be fair, defensive win shares are heavily based on team defensive success, and Cleveland has guys like Jarrett Allen and Evan Mobley. However, by season's end, Rudy Gobert was the leader in the stat category, which makes sense as he's probably going to win his 4th Defensive Player of the Year award this year. Make sure to relish this one though, Rudy, because Wemby is probably winning the next 7. Now let's talk about some players that really know how to create for themselves. The players with the highest percentage of unassisted field goals. Starting with 2-point field goals, the players with the highest percentage of unassisted ones were James Harden and Spencer Dinwiddie at 84.3%. Yeah, this surprised me too. James Harden's always been known as a ball-dominant, isolation-heavy scorer, but at this point in his career, he's really more known for his playmaking. I guess he still has the ball in his hands a lot, but I'm surprised Russ, Kawhi, or Paul George are never finding him for open looks that he's hitting. Also, Spencer Dinwiddie's just Spencer Dinwiddie. He's not someone I want taking off the dribble unassisted shots as the biggest part of his game, no offense. For unassisted 3-point field goals, the leader is Luka Doncic at a whopping 70%. This is the player I expected to lead in all types of unassisted field goals, so this definitely makes sense. Luka Doncic is a master of step backs and creating for himself and others. Additionally, the Mavericks have a somewhat heliocentric offense around Luka, so he has the ball in his hands a lot of the time. On the topic of doing it yourself, let's talk about the player who fights inside and gets the highest percentage of his rebound opportunities. This guy has been known his whole career for being a monster on the glass, and even in limited playing time, his percentages speak for themselves. With an 18.7 offensive rebound percentage and a 33.1% defensive rebound percentage, Andre Drummond leads the NBA in both of these categories. Now let's start rattling off a few more obscure stat categories. Alex Caruso, known as one of the best on-ball defenders in the entire league, has led the league with 3.7 deflections per game this season. Even if you don't get the steal, getting the deflection is a great way to disrupt the offense and force a lower quality shot, so this is a nerdy stat, but it is an important one. In terms of screen assists, Domantas Sabonis is always willing to lay his body on the line and set a hard screen. The Kings love running the De'Aaron Fox and Sabonis pick and roll, so Sabonis creates a lot of baskets with his good screen setting. He had 485 screen assists on the season, while second place was a distant second with 363. And if we're talking about laying your body on the line, the most extreme way of doing that in basketball is taking a charge. There are a lot of guards in the NBA who have the courage to take a charge if they're the last line of defense, but no one is more willing and more able to take charges than Brandon Podziemski of the Golden State Warriors. Usually it's the veteran guards who know the correct way to bait an offensive player into a charge, but the Warriors rookie has mastered this art and took 38 charges this season. Now let's talk about isolation scoring. Out of players who took at least one isolation shot per game, the best, most efficient scorer in the entire NBA was Kawhi Leonard. In 3.7 isolation shots per game, he averaged 1.2 points per possession, which is really impressive. Keep in mind, I am instituting this 1 possession per game minimum, so Corey Kispert isn't the leader, because he averaged 1.5 points per possession on 8 possessions throughout the entire season. If you increase this threshold to 4 possessions per game, which only 8 players in the league qualified for, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander was the most efficient scorer at 1.11 points per possession. But what about the really bad isolation players? With that 1 possession per game threshold, we have Aaron Gordon. In 1.1 possessions per game, he somehow only averaged 0.64 points per possession. I mean, isolation scoring is definitely not the strongest part of Aaron Gordon's game, and the Nuggets definitely don't need him doing that, but it still surprised me a little bit. Until about the beginning of April, Scoot Henderson seemingly had this distinction locked up, before ending the season on a nice little run and avoiding the honor of having this award, I guess. If we increase it to 2 possessions per game, Kyle Kuzma is the least efficient scorer at 0.75 points per possession. And finally, if you increase the threshold to 3 possessions per game, the least efficient scorer is actually All-Star and potential All-NBA player Tyrese Maxey at 0.84 points per possession. Definitely a little bit surprising, but also makes sense. Tyrese Maxey was tasked with a lot of individual scoring with Embiid out, and while he generally did a pretty good job, there definitely were points of inefficiency. Flipping from isolation scoring to maybe the exact opposite play type, let's go to catch and shoot opportunities. Lauri Markkanen is the leader in both 3-point makes and 3-point attempts in catch and shoot scenarios, with 3.2 and 7.7 respectively, which translates to a nice 41.6% 3-point percentage. The player who leads the league in the most points per game as the roll man in the pick and roll is Nikola Vucevic. NBA.com says he gets 6.9, nice, of these possessions per game, and he scores 7.6 points per game on these possessions, both of which are leading the league. His efficiency is only in the 46th percentile out of all NBA players, but I guess they don't have many other sources on offense on the Bulls, so this probably is one of their better options for scoring. And last, and maybe least, in terms of our season-wide average stats, let's talk about who got the most cardio in the NBA this season, aka which player who ran the most miles. It's kind of crazy the NBA even tracks this stat, and I don't know how they track it, but let's just talk about it. The player who runs the most miles per game is none other than Tyrese Maxey, who on average runs 2.91 miles per game. This one kind of surprised me. I would have thought it was someone like a ball hawk defender like Kawhi, or someone who's constantly running around screens to try to get an open shot like Steph. And to an extent, Tyrese Maxey is doing that, and he's also close to the league in minutes per game at 37.6, so I guess it makes sense. So we've talked about some obscure season averages, but now let's talk about some single game performances from this season that are unique or impressive in their own way. We all know about Joel Embiid's 70-point game and Luka Doncic's 73-point game this season, but in those games, Embiid played 37 minutes and Luka played 45. Let's talk about someone who got their buckets and still got plenty of rest in that game. Let's talk about the player who played the least minutes in a 30-point performance this season, and that would be Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. On January 11th, Shai dropped 31 points in just 21 minutes. He went 11 for 15 from the field, 1 for 3 from 3, and 8 for 8 from the free throw line. Shai got his 31 points, which he did exactly 31 points in 13 games this season, on the way towards the Thunder absolutely decimating the Portland Trailblazers. The margin of victory in this game was 62 points, which is also the highest mark for this season. In that game, Shai had a plus 41 plus minus, which is very impressive, but it was not the best from a player this season. That title actually goes a tie between two people, one being Josh Giddey in that game, who was plus 46, and the other being Josh Hart 6 days prior against the 76ers, where the Knicks beat them by 38 points. On the flip side of that, what about the worst plus-minus from a player this season? You would think it would be a player from that OKC Portland game, but on the Portland side, because that was the biggest loss of the season, and you would be partially correct. It is someone who played in that OKC Portland game, but it was not that specific game. Scoot Henderson has the worst plus-minus of the 2024 season, with an abysmal minus 58 in a March 29th loss to the Miami Heat. He had 20 points, 6 rebounds, and 6 assists, but also added 7 turnovers, and the Trailblazers were just simply outmatched. Funnily enough, Scoot Henderson also co-owns the second worst plus-minus of the season, with Miles Bridges at negative 56. Let's go with one more negative record for the season. Which player had the most turnovers in a single game? And to be honest, this one really surprised me. It was actually Domantas Sabonis on January 2nd against the Hornets of all teams. He had 11 turnovers in a surprising loss to one of the bottom feeder teams in the NBA. The only other player with double-digit turnovers this season was Shaedon Sharpe against the Los Angeles Lakers on November 17th. How about the most three-point attempts in a game this season? That would belong to the greatest shooter in NBA history, Stephen Curry, as it should. Only the best shooters should be taking that many three-point shots. On February 3rd against the Atlanta Hawks, Steph Curry dropped 60 points on 10 for 23 shooting from 3. 23 is a lot of three-point attempts. But you know it's even more than 23? 32. I know, outstanding mathematics. 32 happens to be the most free throws attempted in a game this season. On December 13th against the Pacers, on Giannis' 64-point night, he made the home Milwaukee crowd sit through a grueling 32 of his free throws. Finally, I guess, to round out the most shots trifecta, let's talk about the most field goals attempted in a game this season. This one happened pretty recently. On March 29th, Jalen Brunson attempted 47 shots en route to 61 points against the San Antonio Spurs. Yet, the lowly Spurs did get the last laugh, as they would come away with the win, despite Brunson's historic night. From the most shot attempts, let's go to the most shot attempts without a miss. Earlier in the season, Nikola Jokic and Jonathan Kuminga shared this record, both going 11 for 11. However, on April 9th, Daniel Gafford shot 12 for 12 from the field, en route to 26 points. He did shoot 2 for 4 from the free throw line though, so I guess he technically did miss. The most true shots without a miss then would be Nikola Jokic on December 28th against Memphis. He went 11 for 11 from the field, 1 for 1 from 3, and 3 for 3 from the free throw line, so he truly did not miss a shot. He dropped 26 points, 14 rebounds, and 10 assists in this game, which was an easy win over the Memphis Grizzlies. Jalen Brunson, perhaps more impressively, went 9 for 9 from 3 on December 15th, which is the most three-point makes without a single miss this season. This was one of the better individual performances from a player this season, shown by his final stat line of 50 points, 6 rebounds, 9 assists, and 5 steals to beat a fully healthy Suns team. Sticking with the three-point theme, what about the most three-point attempts without a single make? An interesting record because it requires you to have the confidence to take a bunch of three-point attempts, even if it's obviously not your night. Well, the greatest shooter in NBA history actually has 2 games this season, where he shot 9 three-pointers without making a single one, which is extra shocking considering going into the season, he had a stretch of 268 consecutive games with a three-pointer. He even had a third game this season where he went 0 for 8 from 3. However, this might be the craziest stat in this video. Delano Banton on April 14th, the last game of the regular season, went 0 for 15 from 3. I know casuals are always like, oh yeah, put me in an NBA game and I could score 15 points, which for most people is not true. But yeah, I actually think I could at least go 1 for 15 from 3 in an NBA game. The most total field goal attempts without a make this season belongs to Saddiq Bey, Aaron Gordon, and Malachi Flynn, who all went a crazy 0 for 12 from the field. 2 other crazy stats about these nights: Saddiq Bey and Aaron Gordon's games, they both had exactly 7 rebounds, 2 assists, 0 steals, 0 blocks, and 1 turnover. And the 0 for 12 game from Malachi Flynn happened the game after he became one of the most irrelevant players in NBA history to drop 50 points in a game. Now let's talk about which player played the most minutes in a game this season. Tyrese Maxey played 54 minutes on April 7th, a rest day for Joel Embiid shortly after returning from his meniscus injury. He had a great stat line in that game too, a double overtime win against the San Antonio Spurs, dropping 52 points, 5 rebounds, and 7 assists. The other 5 players to play over 50 minutes in game this season are Donte DiVincenzo at 53, Anthony Davis at 52, and Kobe White, D'Angelo Russell, and Lauri Markkanen at 50. And a few more random stats before ending this video. Anthony Edwards had the most points off turnovers in a game this season, having 17 points of this variety against the Lakers on March 10th. Precious Achiuwa and Anthony Davis had the most second chance points in a game this season with 16 each. Alperen Sengun, Triple J, Tyler Hero, Jordan Poole, Rui Hachimura, and Zion Williamson have been blocked the most in a game this season with a total of 6. And the starting lineup of the Oklahoma City Thunder, Shea, Giddey, Lou Dort, Jalen Williams, and Chet Holmgren, played an impressive 63 games together this season, which was by far the most used starting lineup in the NBA. And at long last, that is all I had for this video. I hope you guys liked this style of video. I haven't really seen videos like this on YouTube, so yeah, I hope y'all enjoyed. Let me know what you are most excited about for these NBA playoffs, and let me know any video ideas you want to see for the rest of the playoffs or during the NBA offseason. This is the Sports Ball Network, signing off. Peace.